Thanks, Griselda. Let's move further afield and look at a key global institution. And it seemed like victory was in sight for Africa and for an accomplished black African woman. But the United States has now blocked consensus around naming Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as the next Director General of the World Trade Organization. The Nigerian candidate was earlier recommended to the General Council of the world body, made up of 164 member states, after receiving key endorsements from the European Union, the African Union, Japan and China. The US insisted that despite those endorsements towards a consensus decision, the South Korean candidate Yoo Myung-hee remains in the race. This was Dr. Okonjo-Iweala in conversation with the SABC's Sherwin Bryce-Pease last week.
You asked me, why am I the most qualified? Let me just say a very quick word. I'm a reformer. The WTO needs reforms. My reform credentials are clear. I have strong political skills to be able to bring members together. I have managerial experience from the World Bank. I've been a minister for 7 years, the longest serving finance minister in my country. And I'm also working right now at the intersection of public health and trade. So if you put all this together, I think I'm the candidate for the time.
All right, Sherwin joins us now to explain developments in Geneva today. Sherwin, what a disappointment. So despite receiving key endorsements from a majority of member states, the United States is holding out. Explain how this process unfolded.
Right, so in June, Francis, we had 8 candidates. That, over a process of months, was whittled down to 2 candidates, the Nigerian and the South Korean, early in October. Because this decision is going to be taken through consensus, there's a lot of consultation that happens. And then the General Council, which is essentially the General Assembly of the WTO, they then appoint a troika made up of the chairs of the main committees of the WTO to then quietly and privately canvass the member states in terms of who they are going to back in this race. What that troika did today is they called an informal meeting of the ambassadors to present their findings, and their findings showed that Okonjo-Iweala had broad consensus among member states and that the South Korean candidate did not enjoy the level of support she did. Then the United States stood up and took the floor, said they would not support the Nigerian's candidacy, and that South Korea's Yoo Myung-hee, that's that country's trade minister, is a bona fide trade and WTO expert with negotiating experience, and therefore they cannot support the consensus around the Nigerian frontrunner. I will just add, Iweala, of course, is an investment envoy for the African Union on COVID-19. She's also part of President Cyril Ramaphosa's Economic Advisory Council, a former finance minister from Nigeria, a former foreign minister from Nigeria, a former number 2 at the World Bank. China then also took the floor and said they supported the WTO process that now is recommending Iweala's candidacy for the top job. And what this meeting decided to do was to then defer a final decision until a formal meeting of that General Council on November 9th. So essentially you have one superpower on the right and you have another superpower on the left, one against, one supporting her candidacy. I did hear from her team, Ngozi's team, Dr. Ngozi's team, a short time ago. They say Dr. Ngozi is immensely humbled to receive the backing of the WTO Selection Committee today. She's honored by the faith that members have placed in her and in her vision to return the WTO to its founding mission and deliver for its members. Dr. Ngozi looks forward to the General Council on November 9th. I also heard from a source within that General Council meeting, Francis. This is what that source says. If the Korean minister has any self-respect, she will speak out and confirm that she has been eliminated from the race. Essentially, member states, Francis, agreed to a process of consensus. That is how the WTO DG is historically and traditionally appointed. That consensus has now revealed a frontrunner. The United States is standing alone, America first if you want to call it that, and trying to block this process. What we are hearing is they do not have the numbers to do so. So if the United States, for example, on November 9th were to force a vote, it's unclear how they win that vote given the broad support that Okonjo-Iweala now enjoys.
All right, so she's still in the running. Sherwin, you chatted to Dr. Okonjo-Iweala recently. We saw that, and she was expressing her quiet optimism in terms of securing the post. Do today's developments, though, undermine what could be a historic day for women in Africa? I mean, it sounds like even if she gets it, there's a bit of a fight in store.
But this is a broader problem about multilateral systems. Part of the multilateral system is that decisions are often taken through consensus. The Security Council at the United Nations is very unique in that sense, in that 5 permanent members have what's called the veto and therefore can undermine that consensus. But when a multilateral process, whether you're talking about the Paris climate change negotiations or the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted in 2015, you have to get everyone's buy-in to that agreement, because there is no veto. So the rules say we have to agree to get to that point. So if the US, for example, not wanting to concede to that consensus, then wants to call a vote, then we will do that. But that then falls out of the process that the United States and all member states to the WTO agreed to at the beginning of this process. Look, I chatted to Dr. Iweala last week. I talked to her about whether she was feeling optimistic about her trajectory in this race. She said she was quietly optimistic, but that, consultation continued. I also asked her why the WTO should matter to people around the world, particularly in rural areas. This is what she had to say, Francis.
The WTO is all about trade, and trade affects every single one of us, even down in the rural areas, in the village. We produce things, we sell them to other people. Some of these things are sold on in bulk to people elsewhere in other countries or even within the same country. So it's all about trade. And trade is one of the means by which we improve our living standards, our economics. So to the ordinary woman and man in the street, if you're talking about trading in goods that you produce or buying other goods, that's what the WTO rules underpin. And that's why it matters to the person on the street that they should work. And I just want to say that, the WTO's rules also need to be upgraded to digital economy, the green economy, and it needs new rules to underpin micro, medium, and small enterprises and women in trade. That, again, is something that matters very much to the ordinary person, because in our countries in Africa, there's so many micro, medium, and small enterprises. Many of them are owned by women. And if we can get them to produce more, trade more, and be part of the regional and local supply chains, people's living standards will improve. That's why the WTO matters.
I predict, Francis, that there is a lot of pressure now from the majority of member states that are supporting Okonjo-Iweala, a lot of pressure now being placed on the South Korean trade minister to withdraw from this race, despite the interventions we are seeing from Washington at this time.
Sherwin, we have time for one quick question. I mean, you laid out her credentials earlier. This is a very accomplished woman who can lead the World Trade Organization. The U.S. blocking consensus today, do you think that could be seen or would be seen as racist, or at the very least, resistant to African excellence and African people in positions of power?
Look, I would be speculating if I were to say this had to do with race. I mean, the stranger thing here is that Okonjo-Iweala is also a United States citizen. She spent a lot of a professional career in the United States. She's a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She was actually one of the front runners to replace Dominic Strauss-Kahn at the International Monetary Fund. That position eventually then going to Christine Lagarde, the French foreign minister, as Europe maintains its stranglehold on the top position at the IMF, similar to the United States having the presidency at the World Bank. These are structural reforms that still need to happen in these institutions. So I don't want to equivocate as to whether this is about race. She's clearly eminently qualified for this position. And this is, I think this speaks to a broader United States foreign policy, right? If we're talking about the Iran nuclear deal, the United States stood alone in trying to undermine that multilateral agreement. When you look at the Paris climate change agreement, it's the United States that withdrew its signature from that agreement. So this talks to a process that we have seen before. So it should not surprise people watching this that the United States is again trying to stand alone despite the international consensus that has surrounded her candidacy.
Yeah. Yeah, an interesting stance. Thank you very much. As always, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, our US correspondent, and we'll speak to him again soon about the United States and the race towards elections.